My wife kicked me out thinking I'd beg. Weeks later, her mom begged me to pay their mortgage. I never imagined that a single moment could unravel the fabric of my life so completely. It was a typical evening when my wife, in a fit of rage, screamed, "You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back." Stunned and heartbroken, I packed a small bag, thinking that after a few days apart, we'd reconcile. But days turned into weeks, and the silence between us grew deafening. I resisted the urge to call, to plead, believing that space might heal our wounds. Then, unexpectedly, her mother reached out, demanding to know why I had stopped paying their mortgage. The audacity of the question left me speechless for a moment. I replied calmly, "Since your daughter declared me ungrateful and told me to leave, I assumed she no longer required my support." The line went silent. That conversation marked a turning point. I began to reflect on the years of emotional labor, the sacrifices, and the subtle erosion of my self-worth. I realized that love isn't about financial support or enduring constant belittlement. It's about mutual respect and understanding. This journey of self-discovery taught me the importance of setting boundaries and recognizing my own value. To anyone feeling trapped in a similar situation, know that your worth isn't determined by others' perceptions. Stand firm in your truth and prioritize your well-being. In the days that followed that unsettling phone call, I found myself reflecting on every red flag I had ignored. I remembered the subtle jabs at my career, the way she dismissed my opinions in front of her friends, the way every family gathering became an unspoken reminder that I wasn't from her world. You see, when we first met, I was just a school teacher with a modest income, while she came from a wealthy family that never hid their disapproval. But I loved her, or at least, I loved the version of her that existed before the entitlement and resentment crept in. When we got married, I thought love would be enough to bridge the gap between our different backgrounds. I took on extra jobs to help with the mortgage on the house her parents picked out. I paid for home renovations, family vacations, her siblings' tuition, all because I believed that love meant providing. I didn't realize until much later that what I was actually doing was buying peace in a relationship that had started to rot from the inside. The turning point wasn't her yelling or me walking out. It was the eerie calm that followed. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was free. Free from the emotional gymnastics. Free from always trying to prove I was enough. And with that freedom came clarity. I stopped all financial support, canceled the joint accounts, and removed myself from any obligation that tied me to that house, because, let's be honest, it was never really mine. And then something unexpected happened. I started to rebuild. I rented a small place in the city, focused on my teaching, and eventually launched an online education platform that took off faster than I ever dreamed. Within 6 months, I was making more than I ever did while married. But more than the money, it was the peace that overwhelmed me. Waking up without being criticized. Coming home to silence that didn't feel cold, but comforting. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started dating again, not to fill a void, but because I was finally whole. My ex tried to contact me again. It started with polite emails about unfinished business, then escalated to guilt trips about how we could have had it all. But I had moved on, not with hatred, but with self-respect. And when her mother called me again, yes, again, it wasn't about the mortgage this time. She was asking for help, financial help. Apparently, my ex had maxed out her credit cards, the house was underwater, and the family needed a bailout. And do you know what I said? Nothing. I simply wished them well and ended the call. You see, silence is powerful when it's filled with dignity. That chapter of my life was over, and in its place, I had written a new one where I was the author, not just a character trying to survive. If you're listening to this and you're in a relationship where love feels like debt, where peace feels like a performance, I want you to know that you're not alone. You deserve to be loved out loud, respected without conditions, and supported without strings. Don't wait for someone else to recognize your value. Recognize it yourself. And once you do, you'll never settle for anything less. The days kept rolling forward, and with each one, I grew stronger, not just in my career, but in my spirit. I began attending therapy sessions, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I had tolerated being treated as less for so long. What I learned shocked me. I had been raised to equate love with sacrifice, to think that enduring hardship in silence was noble. But silence, when rooted in fear, is not noble, it's suffocating. I had lost parts of myself trying to mold into someone else's expectations. And now, I was determined to rebuild. I started waking up early, not out of anxiety, but excitement for the day ahead. I poured myself into my work, and my students noticed. I wasn't just teaching them math or literature anymore. I was teaching them resilience, integrity, and self-worth through the way I carried myself. My online platform expanded internationally, and I was invited to speak at conferences I used to only dream of attending. It was surreal, but the best part wasn't the applause or recognition. It was knowing I got there by walking away from what no longer served me. One evening, about a year after I left, I was sipping coffee on my balcony when I got a message from a mutual friend. They sent a screenshot from my ex's social media, a post filled with regret, vague references to mistakes, and how people never appreciate what they have until it's gone. I didn't feel vindicated or smug. I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow that she had chosen a path of manipulation instead of mutual growth. Relief that I had not spent a lifetime waiting for her to change. I no longer needed closure because I had created my own, through honest work, meaningful relationships, and most importantly, by learning to love myself without condition. Months later, I met someone kind, grounded, and genuinely supportive. She didn't care about my bank account or who my parents were. She cared about how I spoke to strangers, how I treated myself, how I listened. Being with her felt like peace, not a performance. We'd cook dinner together, laugh until we cried, and talk about dreams instead of debts. And when I told her my story, not the dramatic version, but the truthful one, she didn't pity me. She admired the journey. That's when I realized, this is what love should feel like. Not loud and conditional, but quiet and sure. I used to think that loyalty meant staying no matter how bad things got. Now, I know that true loyalty starts with yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot build a future on broken trust and silent suffering. So, if you're listening, let me say this. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose peace over chaos, truth over appearances, and joy over duty. Your worth is not determined by how much you endure, but by how much you refuse to accept what is beneath you. I'm not angry at my past anymore. In fact, I'm grateful. It taught me what I would never tolerate again. It pushed me to become the man I was always meant to be. And now, every time I look in the mirror, I don't see the man who was screamed at, used, or dismissed. I see a man who walked through the fire and didn't just survive, he rebuilt. Stronger, wiser, free. And as I settled into this new chapter of my life, I found myself drawn more and more to helping others who had walked similar paths. I started sharing small parts of my journey online, not out of bitterness, but out of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone who felt stuck would find a piece of themselves in my story and realize they weren't alone. The messages started trickling in slowly. A man in his 40s who finally decided to leave a toxic marriage. A woman who had been gaslit for years into thinking she deserved the emotional neglect she suffered. A young couple who had been afraid to speak their truths to each other, but found courage in vulnerability. These stories, these souls, they reminded me why our pain, though personal, is never isolated. We carry each other forward, through stories, through resilience, through honest reflection. I began hosting small community circles, nothing formal, just groups of people sitting together, sharing, listening, healing. And I never presented myself as someone who had it all figured out. I still had moments of doubt. I still flinched at sudden conflict. But I was healing in public, openly, and that made all the difference. One night, as I looked out at a group of 20 strangers gathered in a local cafe, all leaning into one another, I felt the quiet power of truth. Not the explosive kind, not the dramatic outbursts we see in movies, but the steady, unshakable kind that rises from within when you finally know who you are. And in those moments, I forgave her, not for her, but for me. Because carrying the weight of anger does nothing but anchor you to a moment that's already gone. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. Mine led me to growth, to peace, to purpose. I didn't need an apology anymore. I didn't need closure from her or validation from anyone else. My closure was built piece by piece, and every new morning I woke up without bitterness, and every decision I made that put my well-being first, and every laugh shared with people who saw me for who I truly was. I began to understand something deeper, that self-respect isn't loud, it's quiet. It doesn't demand attention, it simply holds the line. And the more I honored that line, the more peace I found. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wasn't watching her life unfold hoping to see her fall. In fact, I wasn't watching her life at all anymore. I let it go, fully. And with that release, something beautiful took its place. Freedom. Not the kind that's about escape, but the kind that comes when you stop running from yourself. I looked back at the man I was, giving, hopeful, maybe a little too trusting, and I didn't hate him. I honored him, because he loved without fear, even if he got hurt. Because he showed up every day believing in the best of someone. And that kind of heart is rare. I didn't need to become hard or bitter to grow. I just needed to become wiser. I kept that softness, but I gave it better boundaries. I still loved, but I made sure to love myself too. And it paid off, not just in relationships, but in how I showed up for life. I started investing in causes I cared about. I mentored young entrepreneurs. I traveled, experienced cultures that opened my eyes to new ways of living and being. Life didn't just get better, it got deeper, richer, more meaningful. And none of that would have happened if I had stayed in a life that required me to shrink. Sometimes, the greatest gift is the door that closes so hard it forces you to find your own exit. One evening, I found myself walking along a quiet beach, the sun setting behind the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. The waves crashed gently against the shore, and I thought about how far I had come. From a man broken by betrayal to someone whole, not in spite of the pain, but because I had faced it and chosen to grow from it. I remembered how, not so long ago, I would have done anything just to be accepted again by someone who had so easily cast me aside. And now, I wouldn't trade my peace for anything. That walk on the beach wasn't just a moment of reflection, it was a symbol, a marker, a quiet celebration of the freedom I had earned. In my pocket, my phone buzzed, messages from new friends, colleagues, and even a woman who had slowly become someone very special in my life. She knew my story, all of it, and she never tried to fix it or downplay it. She simply held space for me, and in doing so, she helped me believe in love again. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind. The love that accepts scars, respects boundaries, and doesn't flinch in the face of vulnerability. I wasn't in a rush. I didn't need to prove anything. For the first time in my life, I was simply content, grateful, free. And that's what I want anyone listening to this story to know. You don't have to settle. You don't have to beg for the bare minimum. And if someone ever makes you feel like you're disposable, remember, your worth isn't up for debate. It never was. Sometimes, the person who walks away from you is doing you the biggest favor of your life, because they're clearing the path for someone or something far better to walk in. All you have to do is be brave enough to keep walking forward, even if it hurts, even if it's dark, because eventually you'll find light again, not because someone hands it to you, but because you find it within yourself. In the weeks that followed, I began to receive messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, old college friends, former coworkers, even distant relatives. Some reached out to say they were proud of me. Others simply said they were inspired by how I had handled everything. But one message stood out. It was from my wife's mother, the same woman who once looked down on me for not coming from wealth. Her message was short but laced with frustration. "Why did you stop paying our mortgage?" I stared at it for a while, not out of confusion, but out of sheer disbelief. Not once had she or her daughter checked in on how I was doing after I left. Not once did they ask how I was surviving, or what the breakup had done to me emotionally. Yet here she was, not asking, but demanding support as if I were still part of their family, as if nothing had happened. I didn't respond right away. I took my time. And then, with the same calm that had carried me through all of this, I replied, "Because I was never part of your investment portfolio. I was your daughter's husband, not your financial backup plan. And since I was told to leave and never come back, I simply honored that request." I never heard from her again. That silence was the loudest apology I would ever receive. But I didn't need an apology. What I needed, and finally gave myself, was closure. You see, sometimes we spend so much of our lives trying to earn a seat at tables where people are too blind to see our value. We bend, we break, we give until there's nothing left. But the truth is, you're allowed to walk away from those tables and build your own. One where your presence is appreciated, your voice is heard, and your heart is safe. And if you're listening to this, maybe you're in that same painful place I was. Maybe someone you trusted has turned on you. Maybe you feel like your world has collapsed. But I promise you, there is life after heartbreak. There is peace after chaos. And there is strength waiting in the parts of you that you haven't even discovered yet. Keep moving. Keep healing. Because the future you're walking toward is far greater than the past you're leaving behind.